All right, we're going to talk about a little bit of some of the same things that Bruce talked about. And again, if y'all have questions in the middle, just stop me. We can talk about it. One of the things that Bruce talked about a lot was showed a lot of stuff on stuff on his plant bug program. And again, plant bugs is our number one thing. I'm going to hit on thrips first. But y'all noticed there was no single products on there. We don't do many single products, at least in Mississippi. We don't do any single products. That question come up about that bifenthrin, and you can use other stuff, but when you put something in there with an OP, it makes a world of difference. I don't know, I don't even remember the last time that I have recommended a single product for plant bugs without some kind of something in there with it. See Tucker over here shaking his head. Those pyrethroids, there's no question that we have resistance. I put some tests out this year. You know, bifenthrin, I might have got 30% control, 2 applications back to back, 30% control. Put out acephate alone, you'll get 60% control. You put them together, it's almost additive. And one of the things that we've always wondered about is why does it increase the control if they're resistant to one or both of them? And what we think is going on, and we tried to prove this, and we did to a certain extent, was not sure if this is what's going on or not, but we did a bunch of plant mapping where we went out and made these applications, and then we went and looked at every fruit in the plant, and we mapped where these bugs were going. One of the things that we noticed was they do move around more in the canopy when a pyrethroid is in there. So even if the pyrethroid's not working, it may agitate them just enough to get them to move around and come in better contact with the acephate or Biogen or the transform or whatever. So that's just kind of our theory on why we think that that's working. So as far as what's new and coming, here's your list right here. That's it. There's nothing new and coming. Now, of course, Transform's new, but we've had Transform for a while. Right now, everybody's in the process of trying to get Section 18s for that product. We got ours in Mississippi, which the fact that we got ours means every other state's going to get it. They will not give it to us, I guarantee you, and not give it to everybody else. So that's great news for everybody that we'll have that option, because we really need something to be able to rotate in there. I'm going to hit plant bugs again in a minute, but I want to get back to this thrips thing just a minute. All right, Bruce showed you a bunch of data. He talked about some things we're doing. I put this out last week, and first thing that happened, I knew this was going to happen when I put it out, but I didn't care, because if you call me, this is what I'm going to tell you, so I might as well just put it in print. I'm not going to sit there and hide behind it. I went ahead and ranked them the way that our test, at least the way that they appear. We put this in our newsletter last week. No question, we don't even use thiamethoxam for thrips anymore in the Mid-South region. That would be your cruisers, your evicted duos. So imidacloprid seems to be kind of the standard that's coming. If you order a Delta Pine seed, you're probably going to get an Acceleron I, which is imidacloprid. One of the things that we've been looking at, I see Gus just walked in. Gus treats all this seed. We do a standardized thrips trial across our Mid-South region every year. And if something new comes along, every one of us are looking at it in multiple locations. And we're evaluating it, trying to get an idea about it, what's going on. One of the things that's going on right now that's a little bit different, when we were at the Beltwide, we talked to them some, but Timic is making a comeback. It's Ag Logic Aldicarb is what they're calling it. We all evaluated this last year, had several protocols, and it looked like you remember it looking. It looked real good. And it also has those running checks like it used to where the granules aren't coming out. So you know it looks good because you got those spots at the beginning of apply, but it did look good. Going into this year, the availability of it, I think, in our region is going to be hard to find. The other thing is, are you going to have granular boxes on your planters still? Now, Jack Royal, consultant in Georgia, where they had it labeled last year, told us at the Beltwide, he said, we're putting on granular boxes left and right again. So that's not going to be too big of a hindrance when it comes back, but I don't think it's going to be an option for a lot of acres in this coming year. So the reason that I'm hitting on this thrips thing is he showed you the data that John North did when he published this data a couple years ago, one of our graduate students sitting in the room. We know that we can lose money to thrips. And we talk about this every year. But the reason I think it's so important right now to have this conversation again is because of these dicamba crops. I've been going to all these farmer meetings with our weed scientists and Jason Bond and all of them get up there, and there's a lot of interest right now in these herbicide traits. The fact that you cannot put anything in that tank with dicamba is going to be a problem. Because for years, when you get to about that second, third leaf, and y'all making that Roundup application, whether you needed it or not, most people were throwing something in there. You're not going to be able to do that. And from what I understand, there is so much public scrutiny right now on these traits, and they're worried about drift. The word that we're seeing, that we're getting, things that we're hearing is, if you mess up and you do something like this, for one, you're going to be on your own. You go in there and you throw a Bidrin or Orthene or whatever in for thrips with that dicamba, and you drift on somebody, Monsanto ain't standing there with you because they told you not to do it. And I've been hearing them tell people not to do it. Our Bureau of Plant Industry, I can tell you, at least in Mississippi, they're serious about this. They're serious about it everywhere because they know that this thing could be a train wreck if we don't do it right. They're going to prosecute people if you don't do this right. So what does that mean? In my mind, what that means is you need to do the very best job you can up front on thrips, and hopefully you won't have to spray thrips. So you won't be tempted to do something illegal when you go across that field at that 2-3 leaf stage. Because if you hit them up hard up front and you do what best you can do and you don't have to spray thrips, that keeps you from having to make a separate application, time and labor, application costs across all those acres again. I cannot imagine needing to spray thrips and dicamba at the same time and spraying that 1,000 or whatever many acres and then turning around and doing it again with the insecticide. It just don't make sense. So one of the things that we're recommending, and we've been looking at this, even looking at it by itself. We've been looking at it alone, we've been looking at it in some combinations, but we've looked, acephate is not anything new for thrips. We did that for years, and in Louisiana, even when you hit Timic, y'all were always putting acephate on it first because you get a real quick uptake before the Timic come up. Y'all always did that in Louisiana. But acephate still does look good, look fantastic in my trials and in Gus's trials. In Scott Stewart's trials, it wasn't quite as good in Tennessee for this past year for whatever reason, but the addition of that on top of an imidacloprid seed treatment looks good. Now there's a couple problems with that, I'll tell you just right now. If you order that seed upstream and it comes in treated with imidacloprid or whatever, and you say, okay, I want to put some acephate on it, that's fine. You're going to have to get that done downstream, and once you do it, you're not going to be able to return it. So you better be committed. There's not going to be, I mean, you ain't going to be able to send it back if you do that. So that's something you've got to keep in mind. The other thing is, Bruce mentioned it, and I know this is a hindrance for some people, you do still have the option to spray some in fur. And I'm not sure, it's probably actually better that way. Darren sprays it in fur on all of our OVTs, and you've never had to spray a thrip in an OVT trial, have you? It's on top of his seed treatments. So I'm not telling you you will never spray thrips by doing this. I'm just telling you to put yourself in a position where hopefully you won't have to spray thrips and then make an extra application across the field. Eris, this is where I got beat up a little bit by the Bayer people and Hank. So I put this on here. Eris still looks pretty dang good for us right now. And it is imidacloprid, but it also has thiodicarb on it. And that thiodicarb has some thrips control. It's not great by itself, it wouldn't look good. But the combination of those two still is probably, from a commercially treated standpoint, probably the best thing you're going to be able to just get that's out there right now. Now, where I got beat up on this when all these Bayer sales reps went crazy is when I put this in this newsletter. I said you can only get it on Stoneville seed. And that is true upstream. And as far as the cotton, at least in Mississippi, that was non-Stoneville that had Eris last year, I would say is close to zero. However, they pointed out to me very clearly that you can get this downstream treated, but then you got to go special order your cotton. Hank said they did this on 800 acres last year, but it's not something that happens generally. But Eris is a pretty good product still, and I don't know, it may start failing too because we're seeing some resistance to imidacloprid. But so far it's looking pretty good. Victa Elite, this is what you're going to get on your Americot cotton or your Phytogen cotton, probably straight from the company. Victa Elite, when they told me they were going to do this, I told them it was the stupidest idea I've ever heard, and they did it anyway. Basically, it's just the Victa Duo, and they add a little imidacloprid to it. So we got two products. One they're highly resistant to. One of them they're becoming resistant to, and we're going to mix them together, and that's going to be our product. What limited testing that we got, it does definitely look better. But again, we got two products there. How long this is going to last, I don't know, but it does look pretty good for now. We're adding this year to our standardized seed treatment test to get a better look. We'll probably have at least 10 locations across the Mid-South region. So I wouldn't fret too much, but I would still probably do the acephate over that, just to be honest, if you find yourself in that situation. But again, my whole point on the strips things is mainly based around this dicamba and not being able to put anything in the tank. Any questions on this before we? Yeah.
The AgLogic Alicarb, is it the use rates we used to use with Timic is around 5, or we used to cut them back to 3, and then you realize you really needed 5. We did 7 for nematodes.
So we looked at what was it, Gus? 3.5 and 5 this year.
3.5 and 5, yeah.
Both look real good. Now remember this: I put some on some real. Both of them look good for thrips alone. I put some on some real sandy ground. Y'all remember the Fido? I saw it.
Right.
Now it was pristine from a thrip standpoint, but I hurt that cotton with 5 pounds on real sandy ground. Fungicide package is still going to be real important.
Did it impact yield on your?
It did not yield the highest in the test, which based on thrips I thought it was, and I'm beginning to think it could have been because of that. It was definitely stunted. It sat there and looked a little ugly for a long time. And so even though the thrips control looked good, I think at the high rate I offset it because of the Fido. At the low rate it looked good at 3.5. This year we're splitting the difference and going to 4. The other thing to remember about this product is when Timic went off the market years ago, if I remember right, we were somewhere maybe $3.15, $3.20 a pound. What I'm hearing now is somewhere around $5.75, $5.80 roughly. So it's more expensive now. But $6. But keep this in mind. I mean, if you're paying for a premium seed treatment that's got a nematicide in it, it's not as big of a difference as you might think if you start putting the math to it. But it's high. Yes, sir.
Have you ever looked at abamectin, or is it related to ivermectin that I see up there?
So yeah, it's basically the same thing. So that, like, if you look at a Victa Duo, that's basically thimethoxam plus abamectin, the Zephyrs or whatever, is a seed treatment. Now, that component of that mix is not systemic, but we do still see better control on thrips with a Victa Duo than straight Cruiser, but not to the point because of the resistance that I think I would just say, hey, I'm going to be all right if I went a Victa on my seed. We did some work years ago looking at spider mites, whether we were flaring spider mites or getting control because of the abamectin component. And actually we did, if you looked at the cotyledon leaves, but after talking to Syngenta and some of their folks, we knew it wasn't systemic, so we couldn't figure out why that we were getting control on spider mites on super small cotton. And what they told us was, and they had all these C14 studies where it shows the uptake and all that, they thought it was simply a physical transfer into the cotyledons, that it wasn't necessarily systemic, but when that cotyledon popped out, it had it on it, just from a physical standpoint. But from a thrip standpoint, you know, we do see a little bit of an increase with the Victa Duo over it. So it must have some activity, but I would say it would be limited on the thrips.
Any foliar activity if you just spray
I wouldn't.
abamectin?
I wouldn't go the foliar route with it. From a foliar standpoint, if you got to control thrips, we just got to, I mean, really the list is short. Of course, you got Radiant from Dow, which is not going to flare spider mites, but it costs a lot. You got Orthene, which is really good, but it will flare spider mites. There's no question it'll flare spider mites. Then you got Bidrin and dimethoate. And we kind of switch around depending on the situation. If there's a lot of rain in the forecast, we move away from Orthene fast as we can. And that's when we start going to Bidrin and dimethoate. Dimethoate, out of all of them, probably has a little more phyto and some different things, particularly if you're mixing it like with a Liberty on like a wide stripe cotton. So all of them got a few pluses and minuses there, but that's really our choices. I would never go after a thrip with pyrethroid. And when Syngenta first come out, when they first come out with some of their, what's the name of it there in the pre-emerge, so Syngenta's, why can't I think of it right now? Huh? No. Huh? I can't believe I can't think of it right now. Well, anyway, their original labels only had the pyrethroids in there with it, and we worked with them a while, and they added Orthene to the label. But when they first come out with that, and we stayed on them, but guys, I would not think about it. I know we got a few people that treat thrips with ammo. Pyrethroids on thrips can be a complete disaster. Occasionally, you might see something that makes you happy, but I would not do it. I've seen them fail terribly.
I avoid acephate on the crop early period. I mean, it's gotta be something bad, but the in-furrow or the seed treatment acephate, do you think that flares mites? Do you think that would do it?
I think it potentially could, but you know, over the last few years, and I used to be real high on, hey, let's avoid acephate at all costs, early on, this and that. I kind of been getting to the point the last few years, I think we just take one problem at a time, do everything we can to avoid a problem, but if we're in a situation where it's necessary, I say we deal with one thing at a time, and if we have to deal with it, we haven't until last year, and we saw a little more last year, we haven't really dealt with that very early season spider mite thing that we did 10 years ago in a couple years. I'm not saying it's not there, but we have got away with those acephate foliar treatments, which I would say would be worse than the seed treatment or the other. But I say it absolutely has the potential to. But the thrips right now going into this thing would be my first concern, and deal with the small number of acres from a foliar standpoint of spider mites if we got to. But I already know. I got farmers telling me there's no way I'm going across that field and not putting something in that tank. That scares me because I'm hearing what all these regulators are saying. But that's what they're telling me. So I'm just saying we deal with one at a time right now. And I'll tell you this, Monsanto told me not long ago, they don't have any intention in the near future of adding the insecticides to that dicamba label. No intentions. Now the herbicides are coming, but and the reason they saying this, that you know that the tips they're recommending, the droplet sizes are too big to get good insect control. So they thinking that people are going to not use the right tips to try to get in the middle of weed and herbicide and insect control, and they think it'll make people be more apt to not do it right. And they told me a couple weeks ago they have no intention of in the near future of adding insecticides to it, which I hate. But that's their plan.
Angus, did you look at the aldicarb as far as helping with spider mites, your Gus?
Years ago, 15 years ago, I had a student that worked on this, and me and Gus and everybody was really working on it. No question that the aldicarb is going to have spider mite activity early season. No question. It always did, and it still does. But we ain't looked at it in so long in that aspect. I don't know why that would have changed because I hadn't been exposed to it.
It just seems to me like when we started having spider mite problems when we quit using Timmy.
I agree.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen when we quit using Timmy.
Well, it's definitely, it has activity on it, no question about it. All right, just a few things on plant bugs. Bruce mentioned this. I show this slide, one, because it hurts my feelings. Tucker's over there laughing because he knows what it is. I'm just going to give you an idea. Mr. Jimmy, talking about what Bruce was talking about in that area that we in. What this is, I rent 20 acres from Mike Sturtevant every year. I put plant bug tests on, and Tucker checks it. And on his 20 acres, Tucker treats it just like he treats all his cotton until about the first or second week of bloom. And at that point, I'll call Tucker and say, all right, quit spraying it. I'm going to put some tests out. And I needed to have a bunch of fruit, because if you ain't any fruit, you ain't going to have any plant bugs. So at that point, on that 20 acres, Tucker quit spraying it. I'll wait about 2 weeks, and I'll go from almost no plant bugs to be hitting 100 nymphs for 2 drops, just like that, in 2 weeks. And that's where I put all my plant bug tests. What these numbers are, my rent is the difference in yield on my 20 acres and all his cotton that's surrounding me. It's always the same variety and all that, about the best we can do. And just that bloom period, when I'm not protecting that cotton and I'm letting all them plant bugs be able to put my test out. Now keep in mind, I got spray tests checkered all in it. But this is my rent bill every year from just late season plant bugs in Glendora, Mississippi, right above Minter City. This year, I knew this is the difference in yield. I had a $16,000 bill. I like to fell out. But I kind of got a double whammy this year. I had tons and tons of plant bugs. And usually what little bit of rent I'm paying is the difference in that medium to top crop and the bottom crop that Tucker set for me. Well, what happened this year? My little bit of bottom crop that usually pays half my rent rotted because of all the rain. So the last time I went by that field, I looked out there and it looked like a train wreck. And I knew that it was going to be bad. It was horrible. But my point is, in our area, in the Mississippi Delta area, and it's not just in Mississippi, the Delta area that crosses the river and everything else, plant bugs are a huge, huge issue if you cannot stay on top of them. And that's why we use mixes, we use everything else, because it is definitely our #1 problem.
Angus, don't you think we quit spraying plant bugs a lot of times way too quick?
I do not think that, and here's why. And you start getting out of the science and you get into all this social stuff and just aesthetics and everything else. I think we spend more money to not have a little whip in the top of that plant than it ever pays for.
Amen.
But if you're a consultant and you leave that whip in that field, even if it's not going to contribute to yield, if that farmer goes by, and you're a farmer, I know that, nobody likes to see that whip in the top of the plant. We got some data right now we've all been working on terminating plant bug applications. And we're going to try to apply it on a big scale this year, when to terminate it. What our data right now over, I don't know, 10, 15 locations, the most important time to protect that crop from plant bugs from a yield standpoint is going to be between those 2nd and 4th weeks of bloom, not square. If we start terminating insecticides, and what we've been doing is we've been terminating at 1st, 2nd, 3rd, we've been doing this, terminating, taking yield, doing all this kind of stuff. We have a lot of trouble, and this is very recent data. This is brand new. We talked about it at the Beltline a lot in our Mid-South meeting. If we terminate plant bug treatments after the 4th week of bloom, we have a lot of trouble showing any kind of yield benefit from protecting that 5th, 6th, and 7th week. Now, I'm not telling you to go do that, but what I am saying is that tail end is much, much less important than the front end. And now we're going to try to, this is all of our research stuff, now we're going to try to take it this year. We got big plans to do this on some big fields and try to see if we can show it before we come out with any recommendations. But prior to about a year ago, I probably would have said maybe so. But that little stuff in the top, you can ask Darren. I mean, it might look ugly when you get that switch, but it ain't putting pounds in the basket. And they've said this for years, but just our data, that's what it says. But until we get to the point that we can accept a little bit of that, we're going to keep spraying it late. I know we are.
The way that works, like, is if a farmer thinks he's going to make 1,500 pounds, he's got a buggy switch in the top of his cotton, and he makes 1,500 pounds, he didn't have any problem. But if he thinks he's going to make 1,500 pounds, there's a buggy switch in the top of his cotton, he makes 1,250, plant bugs ate him up.
I know.
You can't.
That's what I said. It's a social thing. It's not just a data thing. And I know exactly what you're talking about. My cotton this year, I had them Ligus trait trials. It looked horrible. And the reason it looked horrible was because the cotton was this big, because this is in some backgrounds right now that's we're not ever going to see. But it couldn't stop. I couldn't really stop it. And when we stopped the crop, looking at the field, you can ask Bruce, it's on one of his farmers. He's like, man, y'all let them plant bugs eat you up. And I said, well, we did in certain plots, but not in everything. And I couldn't believe it. We were still 1,400 pounds, and we had switches this big in the top. I took aerial photos of it, and it didn't even look white because of the brown on the top. But it just never would quit. It was in the backgrounds that we got now. But that top part, goes all the way back to Johnny Jenkins and the bowl tree and all that. It don't put as much in there. So going into this year, and anytime you make predictions about bugs, you're wrong. Usually you're always wrong. But I will tell you this, if history repeats itself, when we see a big increase in cotton acres, we typically see a lot less plant bugs. And the reason why is cotton is not making a bunch of plant bugs that's going to infest other cotton. It's everything else that's making plant bugs that wind up in your cotton. That's what's going on there. So cotton is a sink. It's not a source for plant bugs. So if we see this doubling in acres, like they're talking about, or not quite doubling, but this really drastic increase in Mississippi and corn acres and all that going down, like I said, if history repeats itself, I would say that we potentially might see a much lighter plant bug year. We won't know until we get into it. But a couple things that we've been doing. I'm out of time. I didn't even realize that. let me just say, let me end on this. Bruce mentioned the diamond. He mentioned those studies that Gore did. Basically what this is, and I'll be done, is where we were splitting fields with different insecticides, and that centric and that diamond at the third week. This was at the third week of squaring. That's when we used centric the third week versus diamond at the first week, and then we followed up with all these other insecticides that are non-treated. And this is kind of the data that's kind of linked to this diamond thing. And I think the diamond thing that we've adopted early in the season has probably made more difference than anything we're doing, at least in our area, for control of plant bugs. With that, I'm going to end because we're out of time. For some reason, I was thinking we had 11:15. All right, appreciate it.